Hi everyone, my name is Scott Bono and welcome to the channel. In today's episode, we are recreating High and Dry by Radiohead. Let's get into it. High and Dry was a single for Radiohead's second album, The Bends, which was released in 1995. However, it was actually recorded as a demo for their first record, Pablo Honey, and then it was rediscovered and remastered for The Bends. There's a lot to love about High and Dry, but there's one thing in particular that I think it does just as well as any song that I can think of, and that's what I want to talk about today. Specifically, it's a really simple song that very ingeniously uses layering to create a much more complex and impactful feel, and that's what we're going to walk through in today's episode. So the first thing that I want to talk about today is the chord progression for High and Dry. It's about as simple as you can possibly get. It's literally 3 chords played in the exact same pattern over and over and over for about 4.5 minutes. If you can play an F sharp minor sus chord, an A sus chord, and an E major chord, you can do a pretty good cover of High and Dry. Even though the song is just that simple, just those 3 chords played for 4.5 minutes, the song never gets boring, and that's because Tom York and the band used layering in an ingenious way through songwriting and arrangement and production to convey deep emotion, to make you go on a little bit of a roller coaster ride throughout the song and ultimately have a huge impact. The arrangement of the song, I think, is absolutely genius, and it really uses layering to full effect right from the get-go, starting with the very beginning of the song. So let's start there. Okay, so already, just in the first 20 seconds of the song, we've got 3 examples of what I'm talking about here. First, it starts off with the drums just by themselves, those big, empty, boomy drums that are playing kind of a laid-back, sort of contemplative feel. It's not sitting back too much, like it definitely is going somewhere, but it's not exactly in a hurry to get where it's going. Then after 4 bars, you get the acoustic guitar and the bass that come in. Those give you a sense of the melody of the song. Nothing particularly flashy, just that simple, straightforward bass line, and the acoustic guitar is doing this kind of melodic octave walk down that's giving a little bit of sense for what the melody is. Then after 4 bars of the guitars, the bass, and the drums together, we get our first little bit of musical accent. You get this fast strummed little descending riff of B, A, G sharp played on high up on the neck on an electric guitar with sort of a clean tone. And this is our first little intro to what's going on with layering in the song. That is panned all the way out to one side, which is an interesting little thing that we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about later on, the way that they use panning in the mix. And then that ends the intro and we get into the first verse. So let's take a listen from the end of the intro into the first verse.
2 jumps in a week, but you think that's pretty clever, don't you, boy? Flying along your motorcycle, watching all the ground beneath your drum.
So that's the first half of the first verse, and let's talk a little bit about what we've got going on here. The accent electric guitars drop out. For the acoustic guitar, the octave pattern that was played during the intro is replaced with just simple strumming. Let's take just a quick listen to the guitars by themselves. But as we head into the second half of the first verse, we get our first real change to the dynamics of the song. Let's take a quick listen and then we'll break it down.
Kill yourself for recognition, kill yourself to never, ever stop. You're broken out the mirror, you're turning into something you are not.
So there's actually a lot that happened there in just those like 15 seconds of music, so let's break it down. First, starting off with the drums, it's subtle, but I think it's important. We get our first crash of the song since the very first note at the beginning of the song, and that sort of leads us into a change up in the drum pattern. We go from that laid back, syncopated, sort of cross stick, side stick kind of a thing into a more straightforward rock beat that's got an open snare hit going on. Let's take a quick listen to the drums soloed. Pretty different feeling with what's going on in the drums there. It definitely sort of raises the overall energy and dynamics of the song without changing the tone or the feel of the drums too much. Okay, next, let's talk about what's going on with the guitars. The bass guitar stays pretty much the same as it did in the first half of the verse, and the acoustic guitar that was in the first half of the verse continues doing its thing. Those two things together kind of keep us grounded and connected to what was going on in the first half of the verse and keep us moving along. But there's some interesting things that happen with both acoustic guitar and electric guitar in the second half of the verse, so let's walk through those now. In addition to the original acoustic guitar, there are two other guitars that come in here halfway through the first verse. There is a new acoustic guitar as well as an electric guitar that comes in. Let's walk through what's happening with each of those. First, the acoustic guitar, that's just playing big open diamond chords for each one of the chords in the progression right on the first note of each measure. Let's take a quick listen to just the two acoustic guitars soloed. So that's what's going on with that second acoustic guitar. You'll notice that it's panned out a little bit to the right, and again, I'll get back to the panning in a second and the role it plays in the overall layering and arrangement. But let's go take a listen to what's going on with that electric guitar as well. I'm gonna add that in and we'll listen to that same section. So the electric guitar here is doing something similar to what that second acoustic guitar is doing. It's just playing those open diamond chords, but it's doing it using triads a little bit further up the neck, and obviously it's an electric guitar, so it's got a different feel. And these two things together just add a little bit of additional musical layering to what's going on. So in the first half of the first verse, you've got the sort of very laid back feel going on, just that one acoustic guitar, the bass, and the vocals. And then as we move into the second half, the drums pick up and change, and you add these additional guitars in for layering. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about panning and the way that it's used in the mix and the arrangement. One of the things that I think is really interesting about how High and Dry is recorded and mixed is that basically everything that's the core melody of the song is in mono and right up the middle. There's that single acoustic guitar that's really holding this whole song down melodically throughout. There's the bass line, which again, unsurprisingly for a bass, is kind of panned hard up the middle. And then you've got the drums, which are, obviously in stereo, but there's sort of a very sort of mono feel to the drums. There's not a lot going on in the stereo spread there. There's very little in the way of toms in the song, and we can get into that a little bit later, but it's really sort of sitting just right up the middle of the mix. And it's when all of these accents come in, they're basically hard panned throughout the song. And so you've got the melody in the middle and the sort of the core of the song sitting right there, and then the accents and the layers all come at you in the stereo image. And I think that really provides an opportunity to create a lot of depth and impact when those things come in. Since there's not a lot going on in the stereo image with the core part of the song, those accents really hit you and you notice them. Even if you're not consciously noticing them, your brain notices them when you're listening to it, and I think it sounds really cool. Before we get into the chorus, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the lyrics and the vocal performance. I'm not going to get into a big breakdown and analysis of what the lyrics to the song mean. I did that in my last video on The Old Apartment by Bare Naked Ladies. If you want to check that out, I can put a link up here. But I do want to talk a little bit about the way that the vocal performance impacts what's going on with the broader dynamics in the song, and how the vocal performance, even though it's just that one solitary vocal, is also doing some work here to add layering to the song. And let's take a look at what I'm talking about.
Two jumps in a week, but you think that's pretty clever, don't you, boy? Flying along your motorcycle, watching all the ground beneath you drum.
All right, so the vocals provide really a very consistent feel to what's going on melodically and musically with the song. Kind of airy, a little bit laid back, but very much consistent with the feel of the song at that point. As we head into the second half of the first verse, where the music changes, the vocals change as well, both in terms of the vocal performance and sort of the lyrical quality of the song. Let's take a quick listen to the second half of the first verse, and then I'll explain a little bit of what I'm talking about.
Kill yourself for recognition. Kill yourself to never, ever stop. You broke another mirror. You're turning into something you are not.
So there's a couple things here that I want to talk about. One, from a vocal performance standpoint, whereas in the first half of the verse, vocals are sort of sitting back much in the same way that the drums are sitting back from a feel standpoint. As we head into the second half of the verse, Thom Yorke really changes the way that he's performing the vocals here. He's practically spitting the first word of each one of those lines out at us, and it's in a much more high dynamics kind of a way. He's saying, you'd kill yourself for recognition, kill yourself to never stop, and there's a hard sound on those consonants. Let's take a listen just to the vocals soloed so you can hear what I'm talking about.
You kill yourself for recognition. Kill yourself to never, ever stop. You broke another mirror. You're turning into something you are not.
So obviously that's me singing in this case and not Thom Yorke, but I really tried to mimic what was going on in the original recording. In the first half of the verse, the lyrics are kind of observational. In the second half of the verse, though, the lyrical quality changes to one that's almost accusatory. You'd kill yourself for recognition, kill yourself to never stop. You're turning into something that you are not. That's a very different feel from what we have in the first half of the verse. And all of that, the lyrical quality, the vocal performance, and the change in the melody, all built up by all of that layering that we've done, it takes us into the chorus. So let's take a listen to that transition, take a listen to the chorus, and then we'll talk about that. All right, so the chorus is pretty simple and straightforward, sort of just those two lyrical lines that are repeated twice, but I think there's a lot going on here, so let's break it down. And first, I want to start with just this really cool bass line that leads into a drum fill that takes us into the chorus. So let's take a listen to the bass and the drums soloed as we head into the chorus, just because I think it's cool. I just think that little bass line is really cool, and it does a good job of transitioning us from that sort of up feel that we've built up to into what's going to go on with the rest of the chorus. One thing I want to point out again is sort of the vocal performance and a little bit of the lyrical quality. In the chorus here, the narrator is kind of almost pleading. It's sort of a little bit of a sense of desperation. I think what the narrator is doing there from a vocal performance standpoint is interesting, particularly as we look at how the choruses evolve throughout the song. So we'll get into how this resolves a little bit later on, but I just wanted to point that bit out here. In terms of what's going on musically here, it's again pretty straightforward. The drums are playing a little bit of an up pattern variation on what was happening in the second half of the verse. They're definitely in a sort of higher energy pattern here. The bass line actually gets quite a bit more active and is pretty cool. Let's take a quick listen to what's going on in the bass line soloed. For the guitars, we get sort of two new things here. One of them very subtle. On the acoustic guitar side of things, we add a second acoustic guitar that's just playing the same pattern as the regular acoustic guitar is underneath, just giving a little bit more fullness to the sound. And then we add an overdriven electric guitar sound playing exactly those same chords, and it's just adding a little bit of texture. Again, since these are accent pieces, both of those guitars are going to be panned out. Let's take a quick listen to just the guitars in the chorus by themselves. So the other thing of note there with the guitars is obviously there's a much more upbeat strumming pattern there. It dynamically sort of brings the overall feeling of the guitars up. The last thing on the chorus to talk about is the structure here. Obviously, after we go through the 2 lines once at the beginning, don't leave me high, don't leave me dry, we do that again. This time though, there is a build and everything sort of hangs out there for a second and then it drops off a cliff. Let's take a quick listen to that with everything in.
Don't leave me dry.
So we get this buildup of tension sort of continuing from the second half of the first verse into the chorus, leads us all the way to that don't leave me high, everything hangs out, there's tension built there, and ultimately it gets released with that crash, a little bit of an instrumental interlude, and then the song takes us back to essentially the intro, the second half of the intro where you've got the acoustic guitar, the bass, and the drums. So all of this leads us from that little instrumental interlude into verse 2, and musically and structurally, verse 2 is quite a bit like verse 1, but it does feel the momentum and it is impacted by the momentum that we built through the first verse and the first chorus. We are back into that sort of more laid back syncopated drum part, and the lyrical quality again is sort of a little bit more like the first half of the first verse than either the second half of the first verse or the chorus, but we do have a little bit more going on in the verse here. So let's take a listen to the first half of the second verse here and we'll talk about what some of those changes are.
Drying up in conversation, you will be the one who cannot talk. All your insides.
Musically, on the drum side, we go back to that syncopated sort of lower dynamics feel, and the verse starts with just that acoustic guitar and the bass playing the same pattern as they do in the first verse. But there's a few things that are different. One, from a vocal standpoint, we're still in that more aggressive, sort of biting feel that we had in the second half of the first verse, and the lyrical content, again, is a little bit more accusatory than the sort of airy, more observational things that were happening at the very beginning of verse 1. Next thing that happens that's a little bit different and interesting is there is the use of those accent guitars much earlier in the second verse, and I think really it's a very good effect. Let's take a quick listen to what's going on with those accent guitars because they're really unique and they play this really cool counter melody and make a really great use of the stereo image, particularly with the melody just kind of sitting there right up the middle. I think it's really neat. So let's take a quick listen to just the guitars soloed through that second half of the first half of the second verse, if that makes sense. So I just love those guitar parts, that very sort of fast strummed high part that almost kind of sounds like it could have been played on a mandolin. That's kind of panned out hard to the left. Then you've got the little, single note walk down happening on the right. And then you've got just that gorgeous little arpeggio that happens in on the left. I just think that's such a great effect. I absolutely love the way that they orchestrated that. And this continues into the second half of the verse, which again has that same shift in the drum pattern. And on the acoustic guitar side, there's another acoustic guitar that gets layered in there with some diamonds. And again, just a bigger, sort of wider feel, again, with all those accents kind of really panned out and just filling out that stereo space, taking us to, so far, pretty much the most up dynamics that we've felt so far in the song. Let's take a quick listen to the second half of verse 2, and then we'll go into the second chorus.
They're the ones who hate you when you think you got the world all sound. They're the ones who'll spit at you. You'll be the one screaming out. Don't leave me high.
So again, sort of more of the same there. Great use of that accent guitar, that additional instrumentation, just sort of really carries us right into the second chorus. And the second chorus itself is pretty similar to the first chorus, again, just those two vocal lines that are repeated twice. But this time, instead of sort of building to that cliff, creating that tension, falling off, and then leading us into that sort of down interlude into the second verse, we instead build all that tension, don't release it, and then head on into the solo. Let's take a quick listen to the second half of the chorus as it leads into the solo. We'll listen to the guitar solo, and then we'll talk about what's going on in this part of the song.
Don't leave me dry.
So not the most flashy guitar solo in the world there, but I think it's put to really good use. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening at this point in the song. So first, there is maybe the biggest drum fill in the entire song, which isn't saying much. There's not a ton going on with the drums in this song, but it really sets the stage and leads us into the guitar solo. And there's another thing that happens with the drums. We move from that sort of tight to slightly open hi-hat that we've had for the entire song to this point onto an open ride. Let's take just a quick listen to the drums as we go from that chorus into the solo. So again, nothing crazy going on there, but definitely more of a straightforward and very open feel, which is what's basically happening in the solo. The solo is dynamically the highest part of the song. Okay, so on the guitar side of things, we've got a couple things happening here. One is we have got two acoustic guitars playing just the same melody, that same kind of strumming pattern, very big and high energy, high dynamic. We have the overdriven electric rhythm guitar that's doing basically the same thing. And then we have the solo, the lead guitar itself. The lead guitar part, the solo, is a pretty straightforward part on its own, and while it's not particularly complex or particularly dynamic, I do think that in terms of the purpose that it fills in the song, it really continues what's happening with the lyrical quality and the vocal performance. That droning kind of feel is this very insistent kind of a feel, almost like a pleading. It's there over and over and over again, kind of hammering home the same point, and it won't go away, but it feels almost desperate. Let's take a quick listen to just the guitar solo so you can get a sense for what I'm talking about here. And that takes us into the bridge, which is really sort of like a breakdown half verse. Let's take a quick listen to that, and then we'll talk about what's going on here, because this is a pretty important dynamic shift in the song and really helps lead us to the ultimate resolution of the song.
Oh, it's the best thing that you've ever had, the best thing that you've ever had. It's the best thing that you've ever had, the best thing you've had is gone away.
Okay, so what we have here is basically all of the parts of the song kind of laid bare. The drums start out the breakdown basically completely absent, except for a hi-hat that's essentially keeping time. The guitars are just playing big open diamonds, so there's just a ton of airiness going on in the song, and the bass is pretty much just playing root notes. So let's take a quick listen to the beginning of that with the vocals out, just so you can get a sense for what's happening musically. Basically completely stripped down, and we go from what was definitely the highest dynamic, highest energy part of the song in that second chorus into the solo, and then the entire thing falls off a cliff and all of the tension and all of the energy is released. And this goes along really nicely with what's happening lyrically in the song at this point as well. The narrator basically is saying, this is the best thing that you've ever had and it's gone away. there is sort of a bit of an end to that desperation and that pleading that had sort of been built up through the song. That accusation, that sense of desperation that's there, that built up, it takes us into the chorus. It's spent, it's over. And there is a resignation that's happening with the narrator of the song here. And that carries us through to the resolution of the song through the outro chorus. So let's take a quick listen to that as well. So a couple things of note here. One is, obviously we had that lead line from the solo that kind of gets repeated over the first half of the verse. You're kind of bringing back a little bit of that insistence here, but now with that solo kind of layered in with the vocals and the other guitars that are happening there, it feels a little bit more sort of upbeat. It feels almost positive. It's as positive as anything is or feels in this particular song. But what's really interesting, I think, is when it shifts from that sort of like high falsetto, don't leave me high, don't leave me dry, into the last couple of lines of the song. The narrator, he's repeating that same line, but this time that sort of pleading feel is gone. That desperation, that sort of questioning, it's gone. He's now kind of resigned and just sort of stating those things matter-of-factly, like, he knows you already left him high and dry, and he's kind of come to terms with what's going on. And that's sort of mirrored with what's happening with the song musically as well. The drums are now back to that open ride again, that same kind of feel that we had during the guitar solo. The bass has that same kind of more upward movement. We've got the happiest bits of guitar that are happening. There's actually sort of almost a positive kind of feeling electric guitar riff that's happening there, which I think is really cool. And then ultimately we sort of tie a bow on the song by bringing it again to that little cliff, don't leave me high, and it sort of ends on that open A sus chord, but ultimately resolves to that E major, which is the 1, which gives us a strong sense of resolution of the song. So let's take a quick listen one more time just to the second half of that outro, now that you have heard all of my crazy thoughts about how it works, and see if you can hear what it is that I'm talking about. There's that guitar. Almost a hopeful feeling of that guitar. So overall, I just love the way that Thom Yorke and Radiohead here used layering and arrangement to take the simplest of all melodies possible, just a 2-4-1 pattern repeated unchanging in terms of the pattern over and over and over again throughout the song, and took us on an emotional roller coaster. You know, brought us in from this sort of low-key place, built us up, did it in an interesting way, you know, brought us to a crescendo, broke us down, brought us back to a little bit more of a sense of positivity and looking forward, and then took us to a nice resolution. Just a really wonderful use of songwriting, production, and arrangement to tell a really complex and compelling story with very simple parts. Okay, and since we have broken the song down, we have to put it back together again. So let's just talk about a few notes about my recreation for the song. On this one, I actually played and sang all the parts myself. It's the first one that I've done that in a little while, so that was definitely fun. It's also kind of why the vocals sound like crap, so apologies for that. I definitely did get some blisters on my index finger when I was trying to learn how to play the bass part for this. It had been a while since I had picked up a bass, but ultimately pretty happy with how that came out. As per usual, I recorded my Fender P bass through just a regular straight up Rupert Neve DI, and also into a Sans amp, brought those in and mixed them as appropriate. For the acoustic guitars, I recorded my Taylor 214 CE through a pair of Earthworks small diaphragm condensers. And for the electric guitars, I played my Gibson DG 335, and I actually recorded these through my new Pedalboard, which I had built late last year. I'll actually go through the build of that in a separate video. It's pretty cool. It's the first Pedalboard that I've built in probably like 12 or 15 years. And for the most part, I utilized the Source Audio Collider for both reverb and delay, and I used the HX Stomp with a simple Fender Twin model on it for the to capture the amp sounds on this one. And for the lead guitars, I simply put an Origin Effects Revival Drive Compact in front of those to get those lead tones. The vocals were just me singing through my trusty Aston Origin microphone, which I absolutely love, going into a Neve Shelford channel strip, and obviously a healthy dose of Melodyne on there for pitch correction, particularly for those high-pitched, more falsetto parts. And that's it. That is my recreation of High and Dry by Radiohead. As usual, I had a really good time putting this one together. It was fun to learn and play all the parts on my own on this one, although I've got a couple of really cool projects that I've finished up recently that are collaborations with some new friends and some old friends, and I'm excited to share those with you all soon. You can find the finished product at soundcloud.com/ScottBono, along with all the other songs that I've done so far in the Recreating series. I'll put a link up here to the other videos in the series as well. If you haven't had a chance to check those out, please do take a look. I've got some fun ones in there. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch the video. I really appreciate it, especially sticking this one out. I know this was a little bit of a long one. I've got a couple of other songs that are in the can and ready to go, including my first collaboration with my new 90s tribute band, Black Days. We did a cover of Temple of the Dogs' Say Hello to Heaven, which I'm really, really excited about. The song is up and ready to go on SoundCloud for you to take a listen to, and we are going to be working on putting the Recreating video together for you all soon, so stay tuned for that. And I think I am pretty close to being able to share the long-awaited, really exciting collaboration that I have been teasing for like 9 months on the channel so far, really soon, so also stand by for that. My name is Scott Bono. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.